like the key to success for localization people at the organization is to stop thinking and presenting themselves as translators and service providers, and to start presenting and positioning themselves as cultural and local market experts.
Välkommen. Bem-vindo. Witamy. 欢迎.
Welcome to the Blend Podcast. Fresh, fun, informative. This is your backstage pass for exclusive language industry news and views, interviews with leaders, translators, and pros, and insights on the intersection of words, business, and culture.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. I have a special guest with me today, Yael Sela from Google. Hi, Yael. Welcome.
Hi. See, everybody else was on the record with us.
Yes. So, Yael, you're a Hebrew language manager at Google in the Google office in Israel, and you're also translator, right? So we have a lot to discuss about. So let's just start with you talking about the background a little bit. What is that you do now? How did you end up doing what it is that you do?
So initially, it was actually just a literary translator, and I translated over 100 books,
Wow.
which are also Game of Thrones books and Atlas Shrugged.
Really? Oh my God!
It was really interesting work.
And you're translating from English to Hebrew, right?
English to Hebrew, for many years.
Oh my God! Wow. Yeah. So I've read a lot of your translation without knowing.
You might have it. Also, Eat, Pray, Love, which was very popular in Israel.
It did.
Yeah.
I read that.
See?
Yeah.
Whenever I come into someone's house and if they really like books, I would find at least one book that is.
I mean, Game of Thrones. I have so many questions about that now. Okay, we'll get to it in a minute.
I actually have a whole talk about Game of Thrones translations.
I bet that was. Oh, wow. I mean, that's so hard. It's a big challenge. We actually just had an article because the new Game of Thrones prequel just premiered this week. So we had an article about the Dothraki language and the Valyrian and High Valyrian. So I can imagine that was a challenge.
Yeah, we did some funny things there, trying to get that sense across to Hebrew. But yeah, if you know, there will be a special.
Exactly. We will.
Ask Ronnie for another chapter.
We'll have a special. Okay, go ahead. Interrupted you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This actually started out as a student job because I was looking for somewhere to support myself. As I was, I have 2 MAs, one in culture studies and one MBA. And you know, translation is a good job if you're a student because it's from home back, before hybrid work years ago, and it's flexible in time and flexible in scope, so you can kind of adjust it to your commitments. But then I switched to tech for maybe a year or so, and then the bubble came, and I was sent home along with everybody else. Yeah. And as I was looking for another job, I was translating, and then at some point I said, I don't actually want the tech job. I want to translate. So I was back to translate for 10 years, but then it got a bit boring. So I started teaching translation at the Tel Aviv University and also a few colleges. And I was teaching both literary translation and translation as a business because, as many of the people at home know, most translators are actually self-employed. Right. So they have to do everything themselves. They have to
like our community of translators here at Blend.
Yeah. So it's up to us to promote our business and do it the right way and learn how to sell our services and our expertise, to represent our expertise. I did that for a few years. And then that got a bit stifling as well because it was the time when the literary translation community was kind of stuck with rates going down, and the death of the Google Translate was on the rise, so the death of translation was in the air, and I wanted an environment that was a bit more fast-paced and definitely a bit more lucrative. And at the time, my very good friend, who was the previous Hebrew language manager, decided to make a change in his career, and he moved on to other greener pastures. Not greener pastures. That indicates that he died. No, he moved on. He moved on to be a teacher, which was what he always wanted.
That's a big change going from Google being a teacher in Israel. Yeah.
And the position was vacant. And I went through some interviews, and it was funny, but I actually failed my first translation test at Google. But I made it through the interviews. So I tried to keep away from translation because obviously I'm not a good enough translator for Google. But I am a good enough language manager.
I would assume. So it's a big change.
Yeah, it is.
And so now that I know you've been doing it for a while. Now you're a Hebrew language manager at Google. What does that mean? What is your area of responsibility? Your day? How does your day look like? So what's under this title?
So I would say that context switching is probably the theme because we work throughout the day and we have a lot of competing responsibilities and competing demands. But if I try to kind of cut it into the three pillars, break it down to the three pillars that make the language manager role at Google, that would be a language expert, the voice of Google, and the partner for local stakeholders. So let's take it one by one. So the language expert is the subject matter expert concerning in my case, the Israeli users or local users. Like, what do the user need? What is their English level? What kind of formality do they expect to see in apps?
Yeah, exactly.
So that is the kind of expertise that we bring to the table. Also, for instance, not so much in Israel, but for instance, in India, representing the different variants within a specific locale. So, for instance, there's all types of Hindi. There's English, which is a kind of a
hybrid
of English and Hindi. Okay, so there are complexities to each language. What do you do with French versus French Canadian? How do we do something about Swiss German, or do we assume that they only use that they can use German?
I understand.
So that's one thing, and then we're the connection with the industry. So, for instance, what we present at conferences, we take in practices from the industry. In Israel, for instance, we are in contact with the Academy of the Hebrew Language. In Thai, they have an Academy of the Thai language, in French as well. So kind of what is the industry, what are the institutes of the industry, but also what is the trend in the industry? So for instance, in Israel a few years ago, the trend has started to be gender appropriate in Hebrew, which is a very gender language. So we said, hey, this is a good time to do that as well. And for instance, in other languages, apps were moving away from formal form of address. For instance, the French
friendly.
So that is also, so we sometimes lead the industry and we sometimes adjust to the industry. Another thing would be market consultation. For instance, if a product would like to start working in a new market or start localizing into a new market, they would often reach out to us to ask us, like, what does your market require? And what would be the best way to succeed in the market in terms of language? So that's kind of the first pillar, which is a language expert.
Yeah.
The second pillar is the voice of Google, which means that we are the ones who define for our linguist what Google needs to sound like in that language.
In all products, in all Google products? Because there's so many products we're kind of different from each other. So you say the same for Gmail versus Hey Google.
Exactly. So if you look at our very, very big file guide, what you see, for instance, you would see that, for instance, consumer products like Gmail or YouTube would probably be translated a bit differently than what we call monetization products like AdWords or analytics. And then we also have what we call developer products like Play and Cloud. They also have their own style. So we would definitely make that distinction. And we also make distinctions per country. So for instance, in Israel, we tend to be more blunt and use more humor. In Germany, they tend to kind of not maybe reduce humor, but make it more subtle. And they definitely do away with some stuff like, hey, we're all working together. This is such a nice thing, because they find it suspicious. In Japan,
it will also not work in Israel.
Similar in ways.
Yeah.
In Japan, they go extra polite.
Yeah.
If in any way we've inconvenienced the user in some way, then they would go extra. They will triple the amount of apologies to make sure that so it's different across countries. Right. And this is all packed into kind of a style guide and trainings that we deliver. So that's the voice of Google. And then the last one would be local stakeholder partner, which means we work very closely with marketing teams, with government affairs team, with the comms team, the PR team, to kind of make sure that, and also in Israel's case, also with some of the engineering teams, to make sure that as Google communicates within the local market, we do that with a single unified voice.
Okay. Yeah. It's extremely important.
Yeah. So for instance, the marketing people in their communications that they write in the local language use the same terminology that we have translated and been using for that market.
Yeah.
And also working with them to understand their perception of the market and what they would like the Google voice to sound like, because they are key players and they understand the market very well. So that would be the local stakeholder partner. So these are three pillars that we have.
It's huge pillars.
It's a huge pillar,
Huge pillars. Yeah.
In terms of what our day looks like,
Can imagine very versatile.
So it's a lot of communications with local teams, especially when you're in the office and they see you and they grab you for consultation or just to chat.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work within our team, because the localization team at Google is constantly improving its services and its processes. Mm-hmm. So each of us would have kind of a service or process that we're working on to improve, so that we can support better and at scale all the new products, all the new word count that we're translating every year. Yeah. So that would be another big chunk of the day, like how do we improve our processes overall? There would be also things like cross-functional projects, and there would also be a lot of actually looking at the language and the way our linguists handle the language, and tweaking things, highlighting areas for improvement for our linguists to make sure that the end user gets the best Google experience, language-wise.
Yeah, and it's gonna. Are you guys translating to Hebrew all of Google products or all the offering that we get locally, or not? While we were talking, I was trying to think about what I use in Google, but obviously, my Gmail is in English. But sometimes you get like a pop-up or an error message, something in Hebrew. So I'm wondering, why do you choose to translate, what not, why? It's interesting.
So Google translates most of its, especially consumer products, to over 100 languages. And that's including some of these languages are a bit of a joke. For instance, Elmer Fudd, which is the little guy from the Bugs Bunny movies, or Klingon, or Latin, or maybe Dothraki. I don't know. I need to check.
Dothraki, exactly. Or the new language of the Targaryen family. I don't know what the name of that language. Yeah.
So we might be translating into that, but I haven't checked. It's not my responsibility.
Please do.
So I don't.
Please do.
And we translate our language sets for other products might be a bit narrower, but we do try to we aim at least translating UI, user interface, because that's what people see. Right. And that's what they use most often. And then some of the supporting content, the help center, of course, legal, and stuff like that, because it's easier for people to use it in their language. Yeah. We do have some products that we're still in the works for Hebrew, but they're also already available in other countries, if you think about Assistant, for instance. But we're working to gradually make everything happen and make everything available in bigger markets and smaller markets.
Yeah,
this is
I would say for our, whoever watches or not, we're both of us lives in Israel, but we have everything. So we have we have all of Google offering. It's just some of it is in English because most of us can't understand basic English. But yeah, it is interesting to see kind of the process that Google went through with translating to Hebrew and the last more than a few years now. But I remember the day when everyone in the microcopy Facebook group started talking about that. So
our data actually shows that most users in Israel use our products in Hebrew interface.
In Hebrew?
Yeah.
Wow.
They don't work in Blend. They're not required to speak fluent English like you do. So
I think I have to say now when I think about it, I'm not really surprised because again, we kind of live in this bubble of the high-tech world where we used to communicate in English all the time and everything is in English. Most of the people don't. So it is easier. I mean, to me as a person, private person, it's always be easier, to communicate in my native language, which is Hebrew. So it doesn't
And this is actually the situation across most languages.
Right.
As we have this data about most languages, I think the only languages, like there would be some markets where we can see a relatively large usage in English, but these are markets like the Nordics or Netherlands where the English proficiency is so high that it's almost the same for them.
The same for them, right?
Yeah. But in most markets, and if you're thinking specifically Japan or Germany, even though these are very advanced countries and people are highly educated, especially in Japan, their preference would still be to have definitely their interface, but also the help center and the marketing in their own language.
Yeah.
And if you know the report "Can't Read, Won't Buy" by the Common Sense Advisory, it's fascinating. So Common Sense Advisory, Can't Read, Won't Buy. Patterns, I think it's available online, patterns of how usage changes if you make apps and shopping available in people's native language compared to only in English.
This makes so much more sense. It's also, I'm guessing, depends on what type the app is. If it's a utility app, like, I don't know, like a bus app, bus schedule app or something like that. So it will always be much more helpful if you're native. This is a dating app, which you can, it's fine if it's, in a different language. So it's fascinating. It really is. And you talk a little bit about Google, kind of like style guide. So when you start working on a project, now you need to localize to Hebrew. What are the things that you must take into consideration before you even start working on?
So for us, it would be to understand the product and to understand the audience. So the audience for maybe Cloud Console would be very different than the audience for Gmail. It's not that there of course overlap. So people use Cloud Console probably use Gmail as well.
Gmail as well,
But whereas Gmail or YouTube are for a very wide audience, some of whom are very young or not very proficient in online surroundings.
Or the other way around. Some of them are more older side.
Exactly. Older or, they are less fluent, they're less fluent readers. You can find people using YouTube in other places around the world who have like 4 years of education.
Wow.
So that is a very different audience than, for instance, Cloud Console, which are normally IT managers. And they're normally highly educated. They have a lot of exposure to English. They're very comfortable online. They're very tech. Okay. So if we take, these two extremes, we say, okay, is this the new product? Where does your audience lie on that spectrum of, English proficiency, tech proficiency, age, comfort with using online environments? So for instance, if I take an example from Hindi, that the Hindi language manager showed me a few years ago, because in Hindi, some of the users have relatively low reading proficiency, even in Hindi, what they did was that they consolidated some of the terms. So instead of having both download and install, they consolidated both terms into download.
Oh.
Because because it's automatic. Once you download, it automatically installs.
It installs, right? Because install is like more a high level word. Yeah.
It was confusing. Or instead of when you use your phone to give someone else Wi-Fi, so instead of using the complex word tethering or its translation into Hindi, which is also complex, they used share or connect, which was a simpler and easier word in Hindi. It was easier for people to understand it. Okay. On the other hand, if we were translating content for experts, for IT managers, we would, for instance, leave a lot of the terminology in English because they're used to seeing it in English.
They used to say it exactly.
And they're used to searching online in English, and they're used to seeing the interface in English. So many of whom, for instance, if you look at even at IT managers and people whose English proficiency is relatively high, they feel comfortable using the app with the UI in English, but the longer text, like the help center text or the white papers, they would want to read in their mother tongues with English terminology kind of sprinkled into it.
Hebrewish.
You kind of figure out where does your audience lie, and then you work with the local. So that's one, like, first, what is my audience? And then second would be, how does marketing and sales want to position this product in my market? Like, do they want this? What do they care about? Is it about innovation? Is it about comfort? Is it about helpfulness? For instance, Google's one of main themes is helpfulness. What is most important for them? What are the themes and the ideas that they want the language to support? And generally, what is the attitude in the local market towards apps of that sort? So, for instance, if you look at any app that has to do with money, like payments, you would probably be a bit more formal, a bit
very
more
clear,
explicit, very clear, because people are concerned. Whereas if you're on YouTube, you can be a bit more informal and
fun,
play around and joke. Okay, so it depends on, like, also your state of mind when you're using the product. If you look at a specific user, you have a different state of mind when you're using YouTube for fun and when you're using Search Console for work. It's the same person, but it's a different state.
That's amazing tip, actually, to think not just about the persona that uses, but where are they during their day when they use your product. It's really interesting insight. So that's what we think about. And then we write we add a section in our style guide saying, hey, you translate this and that. That's what you need to think about. That's really interesting. I can imagine, which kind of lead me to my next question, which is Hebrew. Hebrew is not an easy language. As you said, it's very gendered oriented, which is becoming a thing, thank God, finally, in the last, I think, decade or so, where I explained to our users who are not speaking Hebrew that Hebrew tends to be, because it's so gendered, usually in all public way of communicating, usually they would speak in a male form versus a female. That's kind of like the common way it used to be, and it is slowly changing in a little bit, but because of the way that the language is formed, it is a challenge, because some words we just don't have like a combined word. So how do you, I know that Google, you guys are working on it. I can see that. So how do you tackle that huge challenge?
That's just one challenge. It's like we have the gender, we have the different script. Okay? We have the fact that Hebrew is what we call an abjad language, which means very few vowels. And there are more than one way to spell every word. Okay, not every word, but many words in Hebrew have spelling variations.
Right.
Okay, like how would you read Dalet Bet Resh? Is it Davar, Diber, Dubar, Dever? How do you read that?
And that different meaning to each one of the words you just said.
That's why building the text-to-speech for Hebrew, which is now working and very good, building text-to-speech for Hebrew was a specifically hard challenge.
Wow. Can imagine.
Other languages. On top of that, you have the fact that you're kind of writing to an audience, sometimes, the melting pot, people whose Hebrew is not necessarily their mother tongue.
Right.
And so we have a lot. And of course, everything is right to left.
And everything is right. We changed the design and the formation of all of those, of all the text. And on top of that, there's the cultural issue where, Israelis are not American, they're not European, our culture is a little bit different, we're much less formal. So that's a lot of things to consider.
Yeah, and we're a lot more blunt, and we want things spelled out for us. Don't tell us you may want to consider. Tell us, do it.
Do it.
You may want to consider is like, don't leave it up to us. No, this is
off.
But, but definitely 5 years ago, we started, 5 or 6 years ago already, we started kind of a project at Google called Google Israel called Project Goliath. We called it Goliath because it was huge.
Huge.
It was really huge. We were talking about tens of millions of words. Of all of Google's UI, all of Google's help center, all of Google's marketing content in Hebrew was gradually transforming. We're actually kind of almost there. We're almost finished it to gender neutral form. So it's no longer. Previously, it spoke to you like address the users in male form of address, masculine form of address.
Exactly.
Okay, and from end of 2017. We're gradually transforming all of it into gender neutral form of address.
Yeah.
Because we strongly believe, it's not just strongly believe, we have the research to show it. When women are addressed in masculine form of address, they feel marginalized, they feel less empowered, they feel less confident.
I get pissed off. I just get pissed off. Yeah.
and we can actually see that their performance is not as good. There's super interesting research about math called Does the Hebrew Language Fail Students in Math? And that research show that if the tests, women did better at tests that were written in gender neutral form of address than they did in masculine form of address. So, and the difference in performance was considerable. I think it was 7%.
Yeah.
So that was, that was the things that we thought about as we moved into gender neutral form of address, and we kind of making it more elaborate throughout the years. And of course, we have to consider other stuff. If the original text says, "Hey, click the button on the left," and everything is mirrored in Hebrew, then the linguist can change that to click the button on the right.
Exactly.
Right. So it's kind of kind of stuff that you have to think about as you're translating into Hebrew. It's not easy making Hebrew or Arabic, by the way. Arabic is in the same situation, bit less difficult. It's not easy making things gender neutral. It sometimes makes the text a bit awkward.
Exactly. And there's also the formation of how do you write it. It's it's a bit hard to understand if you're not a native Hebrew speaker. But there's this form of not official way to write where you just add a dot, right? If you say
we don't do that. The reason we don't do that.
Thank you for not doing that.
Yeah, it is the common practice though in German and in French because that's how we do it in German and French. This is maybe the place to say that Hebrew is definitely not the only language in Google going gender neutral. Arabic has gone gender neutral 5 years ago.
Yeah.
French, German, Italian, so many languages, Russian, Polish. Gendered languages at Google, which is 50% of languages in the world are gendered, are gradually and increasingly being more and more gender neutral because we understand how important this is to about half of our users. That's very important for them. So we are trying to make it more so. The reason we're specifically not using the dashes or the dots is because it's a bit. It reduces accessibility a bit. The text is a little harder to read.
Exactly.
It's not necessarily read well by screen readers, so we try to avoid that. But it's a tough challenge. You kind of do I make it more inclusive but less accessible? Do I make it less accessible but more inclusive? It's a balancing act.
Yeah, it is really interesting. Yeah, so was the question about that, and that kind of leads me to the next questions talk about it a little bit about that offline. How do you now you have a new project to localize, doesn't matter to which language. Yeah. What do you do now? How do you you and your team, before you even start the actual process, what is the process that you're doing? Because I know it's very interesting. Yeah.
So I think that the first thing to remember is that this, for Google, this happens on a daily basis, okay?
Yeah.
Because we work at a enormous scale. We have over 200 products, which means we get a new product like every couple of weeks, or a new feature, or something new happens Google buys a company, and then we have this product to kind of take in and include in our business. And we have thousands of teams, like within Google, there are thousands of engineering teams, and we localize billions of words per year, billions.
Okay.
So this is a bit more large scale than maybe some other companies.
I would say.
Yeah. So in that terms, we have to be very efficient, which means that we have very clear processes and templates for doing stuff and kind of getting ready to localize new content. Like, we get what we need from the product team. Hey, who's your audience? What do you need to? Can you give us our glossary so that we can localize the glossary ahead of localizing the translations?
Right.
Because we want to make sure that we have a kind of all the terminology translated before we start translating the content. So this is kind of very important. We're very rigorous, which means that we have a very clear process of like who does what. We have both translators and reviewers, and our quality assurance systems are very robust. Everything is, it's a tool, it's an automated tool. We get lots of reports telling us where we did well, where we need to improve. And it's kind of an ongoing process. Like, we watch carefully, very closely. We're very hands-on in kind of making sure that quality is kept within our expectations. Our expectations are high. Our expectations, like I was saying, generally our expectations from linguists are to produce texts that are both friendly and idiomatic, which means they're supposed to sound as much as possible as if they were written in the target language and not in English.
And not in English that was translated. It's a really good point. It's really
So what we would do is we work with the product team to understand their audience. We would work internally with our senior reviewers to create a style guide, to translate the glossary. We would create maybe some training content or training resources for a linguist. And we would, there are some kids coming here with their parents.
End of August.
End of August. Yes. We have lots of kids walking around.
Exactly.
And we would make sure that our linguists are prepared and have the subject matter expertise and have the glossary, and they're all set up for success with translating this new product. And if the product is new, we'd probably also keep a closer eye on it, and maybe review a bit more until such point as we feel that the linguists are familiar with the product, they're comfortable with it, they're doing kind of good work even without much hand-holding. So this is the kind of work we do as we prepare for a new product.
It's a crazy process, and I think a lot of people, I didn't know that before I started working at Blend, because I never worked in the localization world. What a huge effort it is to localize and to translate, because translation sometimes sounds like super easy. I just read something in English, translate to Hebrew, thank you, bye, that's it, but it's not. No. So it involves so many big things and small things, and then out of that, a lot of time mistakes could happen, because again, at the end of it, we're all human. Even if it is machine translation and all of that, we still, at the end of it, it's a human eye that checked that. So what is kind of mistake or an error or something that you can talk about that you remember that happened? Because I'm sure there's, for all of us, we're human. And then the other side, what is one big, achievement on that you can brag about?
So I would say that, if I start with the good news, I would say that, I think first, making the ongoing effort of the localization team, not just Hebrew, but the entire localization team, to make first to have more content, to push products, and so let me say encourage products to localize more kind of understanding this,
Important
sending out the message that while content in English can be useful and Google Translate is out there and it's getting very good.
Yeah.
You still want to make sure that, particular parts of your content are localized by people and that, they're
that's
locally adjusted.
That's the culture aspect. Exactly.
Cultural adaptations.
Yeah.
And I think we can see that Google expands every year. We localize more, which means that the localization is successful at its effort. In kind of making products realize the importance of localizations, the impact of localization, and how users making users feel more comfortable and welcome online using Google products. So I would say this is kind of one aspect I think where localization at Google is successful. I think where we need to do better, we're doing better year on year, but we're still a long far off from ideal.
Yeah,
is that because localization is so complex and it is harder for us sometimes to get engineering teams to create systems and tools and content that are localization friendly.
Yeah.
So the requirements for translating into Hebrew are different from requirements from translating into Polish.
Right.
Think about Slavic languages; they also inflect your name. Okay,
right.
So not just the words around them, but your name inflects in Slavic languages. And if the engineer is an English speaker, a language which doesn't inflect names, then the design of the product would not support inflecting names.
Exactly, because that's one of the things that a lot of people. I mean, I didn't know that design is connected to the way that there's a professional content designer because it changes. So even if you just translate it, if you say it for Polish, it might change the design of whatever it is that you're writing.
Yeah.
So that's
huge. The fact that words that if you take a text in English and you translate it into Hebrew or Japanese, it would shrink. But if you translate it into German or Turkish, it would expand something between 40 to 100%. Compared to the source character count. So that's the kind of challenge. So we are working on it. It's just because Google's so huge, you kind of need to make sure that every system, every content management system, every tool and engineers are they have this in mind that you need to design with your international audience in mind and that things work differently for different languages. So I wouldn't say it's a failure, but I would say it's an ongoing challenge.
I think it's a challenge that me as a marketer can relate to because it is an ongoing process of make sure that everyone, around the company gets that. So I think it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. I think sometimes giving them examples, we sometimes give them examples from their own language if they speak another language.
Yeah.
Hey, if you do this is what it looked like in your language. And it's say, okay, what?
Got it.
Let's invest in that.
It is amazing how much power words, because, I talk with guests in this podcast about the connection between words and culture. So again, even now you just write, I don't know, like a subject line for YouTube, but it can change so many things for the person who use it at the end of it, and it's a huge responsibility. Yeah. Do you feel that? Do you feel this sometimes?
I think you feel the impact. So for instance, you find a small error in the translation somewhere and, you find it on your own phone and then you go into your system, in the evening, you say, hey, you correct it. And then you know that by morning, this will propagate to millions of other phones.
Exactly.
Like this tiny little change that you made is going to impact millions and millions of users, or billions of users. It depends on what the things you're doing. So it's kind of wow. Sometimes I think localization is sometimes kind of overlooked.
100%.
Yeah. But then you think about that the product experience hinges so much on the localization aspect of it. And you think, wow, well, maybe, Hebrew is a small language, but think about our Chinese language manager.
Right.
Or our Portuguese language, Brazilian Portuguese language manager. Or our Russian language manager.
Exactly.
Whose every little change that they make, every little decision that they make,
millions of people,
hundreds of millions of users.
Yeah. When you think about like that, it's very, very big.
Yeah. That's why we're sometimes very cautious. We tend to maybe we prefer to err on the side of caution.
I think it's sensible. Yeah, it makes sense. Because again, once you put kind of like the cultural aspect to that, you can sometimes unknowingly can offend someone or make someone, I
have a really nice example for that.
There you go.
So one of the things that we do is kind of whenever a product would log to launch anything, one of the things they do is that they send the name to us to make sure that it doesn't offend anybody in any language.
Okay. The fact that they're sending it to you is already a good start. Because there's Wix, a really big example, famous example of Wix. One of the first name they chose for their one of their early product was penis in German.
Oh yeah, so we had something very similar, which meant. In Turkish, it meant penis. And if you think about a Hebrew example, the word for like the name that Facebook has selected, Meta.
Exactly.
In Hebrew, it means dead.
Dead. Which we use as slang as well, because something we say. So that's successful. So the example you wanted to share.
So that was the example very similar to yours. Like there was a name that was a candidate, and in Turkish, it meant penis. So that you probably have to exclude that one. It's not a good name. Okay. It may create some issues at least in Turkey.
And I think that's exactly where the cultural aspects, why you need to work with people who are not only good translators, but are linguistics, and they can understand the cultural aspect. And I think Facebook and Meta is really, in Israel, it's really good. Good example.
I think one of the things, like the key to success for localization people at the organization is to stop thinking and presenting themselves as translators and service providers, and to start presenting and positioning themselves.
I think Facebook and Meta is really, in Israel, it's really good. Good example.
I think one of the things, like the key to success for localization people at the organization is to stop thinking and presenting themselves as translators and service providers, and to start presenting and positioning themselves as cultural and local market experts.
That is great.
And as trusted advisors, not service providers, trusted advisors. Our inputs, our understanding of the market, our insights could be extremely important to land the product successfully in the market. We are not translators. We are market experts.
That is a great tip. And I also will have you do this lecture to my community, by the way. We'll talk about it after.
With pleasure.
But it's super important because, again, I think many times translation is a little bit, it's just talking in terms of translation does justice to this huge thing that people do. So I 100% agree. It kind of leads me to my last question. And what's your tip so you had a really good tip for translators and market experts, but your tips to localization managers. Again, I know you're not the classic localization manager, but anything from, professional knowledge to, creating process at work, relationship with stakeholders, which is an issue. We know we have a community of localization managers, and we know that's something that it's been discussed a lot, kind of the relationship.
So I would say that my tip is make yourself their partner. Like when you're working with your stakeholders, especially marketing stakeholders, any stakeholder that works in the market,
right.
Position yourself and work with them as their partner for the success in the market. And make sure that you partner in working together to promote the local market, to land the products well, to present the intricacies and uniqueness of the local market.
Yeah.
So join forces with local stakeholders, because that not only supports your market and your own work, it also supports, it also removes some of the roadblocks and maybe the conflict between our stakeholders and us.
Yeah.
Like, we need to work together as one team and one like go-to-market team, instead of as different
teams that each one have different, KPIs and stuff like that. Yeah. Because the end goal, everyone wants that people will use the product. That's the end goal of everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for the next episode by following us on social media. If you're in the localization business, join our private Facebook group, Pro Localization Club. See you there.
Thanks for tuning in to the Blend podcast. Follow Blend on social for updates and future episodes. We'll see you next time.